Hey everybody, it's Swizzle here, and this will be my first Raid Shadow video. And today, on the first one, I kind of want to talk about the starting champions, since when you first start Raid, that's the first thing you got to decide. And talk about which one's better, or which one I think's better. And also talk about other good uncommon champs and easily accessible rare champs. So when you first start the game, you have to choose a character. And in my opinion, the one out of the four that I think is just slightly better than the others is Kale. But with that being said, all four of them are still good. And even if you pick one and decide you want to play other, you will usually at some point through shards end up hitting the other ones. So it's not the end of the world on which one you pick. But let's go ahead and look at Kale real quick, and we'll go over all four of the champions. Okay, let's bring him up. Alright. So one of the things that people will say, and you'll hear people say, is A1, A2, A3. So you might not know what that means. Well, all it is simply when somebody says A1, that means ability 1 or ability 2, etc. So if you hear somebody say your A1's this or that, or if you hear people using it, that's what that means. Alright, so when we go into Kale, his A1 is Dark Bolt. And it attacks one enemy, has an 80% chance of placing a 2.5% poison debuff for 2 turns. And when booked up, that would be 100%. And then his A2, this is like his more wave clearing kind of ability, which is good for campaigns and etc. Attacks all enemies, has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, and it also fills the turn meter of this champion by 25% for each enemy killed. And then his A3 is Disintegrate. It attacks 4 times at random, has a 40% chance of placing a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns, and that would be 50% booked up. Okay, so right here, go ahead and explain one thing, since it's right here and it's easy on one character. When we talk about a strong version and a weak version of certain buffs or debuffs, this is a prime example. So with this being a 5%, oftentimes, sometimes these things have a weak version and a strong version. The 5% on this particular poison buff is the stronger version of the two, whereas the weaker version is the 2.5. So that's just something to note and know, and that goes on like weakens and other things in the game. So, okay. And then his aura is increase allies' hit points in all battles by 15%. And this is, it's not bad. It's usable if you don't have other auras in certain scenarios. And something to note on this is all 4 starting champs all have the same aura. So with that, moving forward, so let's go ahead and look at one of the other starting champs. Let me find it here. Okay, Elaine is another one of the 4. Now, I like Elaine. She is also very good, and I look at her more for her nuking ability, whereas Kale can kind of nuke. He can do clan boss. I think that's what makes him a little bit better, is he's slightly more versatile, but it's not to say that Elaine's bad. So let's go ahead and look at her skills. So her A1 is Keen Shot, which attacks one enemy and places an extra hit if this attack is critical. Which, obviously, by looking at that and what that reads, is if you do build Elaine, you probably want to get crit on her. Her A2, and this is where her wave clearing starts, is attacks one enemy. It's called Lightning Arrow. Attacks one enemy, then all enemies. Has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, and places a 30% increased critical rate buff on this champion for 3 turns if a target is killed. And as you can see, I don't got her booked, but if I did have her booked all the way, it'd be a 4-turn cooldown when booked. And then her A3, it's pretty simple. Valley of Death, attacks all enemy 2 times. Okay, so she's got 2 wave clears between the A2 and the A3, and that is also on a 3-turn cooldown. And as you can see, her aura is the same. Okay, so then Gallic's right here, so we'll go over and check out Gallic. Now, in my opinion, if I had to pick the one that what I believe would be the worst, it would be Gallic, but only by a slight amount. I just out of all the kits, I think his is probably just slightly the weakest, but we'll go over it here. His A1 is Cross Slash, attacks one enemy 2 times. Simple as that, and you can book it up and get some damage on it. His A2 is, and this is his nuke. I'm starting to think like all their nukes might be A2, but I'm not sure on that. But he attacks all enemies, has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, and places a 30% increased speed buff on this champion for 2 turns. Okay, so that would be his nuking ability. And then you go into his A3, which is attacks 4 times at random. Has a 30% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. And then also has a 30% chance of placing a 60% decrease defense debuff for 2 turns if the target has more than 2 debuffs. Okay, so this is another example. This has the weaker version and the stronger version all wrapped up in one, and a lot of what ifs. And if booked, then it goes up to 40% on these. So it's a little random. That's kind of why I don't like him. There's a lot of what ifs and ifs, and okay, but you know, it's up to you to make up your own choice on that. And moving on to the 4th and final one, Aethiel. Now, her, if I had to pick a close second, I had to rank them, I guess it'd be Kayle, Aethiel, Elaine, and then Gallic. I think Aethiel's pretty close to Kayle because, again, Aethiel is very versatile where she can actually be valuable and viable in Clan Boss, much like Kayle. So her A1 is Strike Down, attacks one enemy 3 times, has a 75% chance of placing a 25%, the strong version, of Weaken debuff for 2 turns on the last hit, and when booked up, it is 100%. So this is what makes her viable on Clan Boss, and later on might do a video on her explaining more in depth on some of these things, but for now we're just going to move on to Divine Blades, which is her A2. It attacks all enemies, has a 15% extra chance of inflicting a critical hit, kind of but that's her AoE, and in fact all the starting champs AoEs are their A2s, and that is also on a 3-turn cooldown. And then her A3 is kind of a buff, and it places a 25%, it's Higher Blessing, places a 25% increased attack buff on this champion for 2 turns, places a 30% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns. If this champion's current HP is less than 50%, gains an extra turn. So there's kind of a little bit of what if in that one too, but it's not bad because it's not great, but it's not bad because you get the extra turn anyway, and it's going to buff you up. Okay, so those are your starting champs, and with that being said, we'll move on to some of the more farmable. There's 1 green and a couple rares that you definitely want to get out of campaign, so let's find campaign here. And now, in campaign, as you move along, you can farm these champs in any difficulty, being normal, hard, brutal, nightmare, doesn't matter, you can still farm these champs. And the number 1 champ that I would say for sure you want to get is over here at 11. And nope, not 11. Let's see, maybe it is Deadlands 9. You for sure want to get War Maiden. War Maiden is one of the characters that is definitely worth ranking up to a 60 because she is strong early game, mid game, and late game, and let's see why. So you go into her kit, and her A1 is attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of placing a 2.5% poison, the weaker version debuff for 1 turn. That's not the reason why you're doing it. Not her main thing. A2, not her main thing either. It's attacks one enemy, places a 50% increase in attack buff on this champion, and places an extra hit if this attack is critical. The extra hit cannot be critical. So that's kind of another, and it's not bad. But her A3 is the whole reason this character is good. And you're going to want to have her ascended. I mean, if you're going to use any champ, that's a give me. So we'll just read from there. Her ascended skill on this: attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Now, maybe sometime I have to get in another video on all these skills, but she is the only rare champ that has, this is the strong version of decreased defense, and it's on all enemies. And decreased defense is very valuable, and as you learn the game, you see why. And it's also going to be, let's see, 85. Yeah, it's a 100% chance when booked up, and it's on a 3-turn cooldown. So yeah, maybe I'll definitely do a video later on War Maiden explaining more in depth on it. But if you're ever questioning which champs you want to take up to 60 and invest in, this is definitely one. And some champs, you might hear me say you only want to invest into 50 and not 60, and the reason being is once you invest in a champion to 60, you're fully committed. There's nothing more you can do with that champ. It's yours. You bought it. It's there. You can use it, not use it, put it in your vault, but you fully committed. If you only take a champ up to 50 and use it for early to mid game and an early mid game champ, you still have value there, because if you're worked past that, you got a better champ, you don't use that champ anymore, don't need that champ anymore, well, then you can use it as food, and it's still valuable for that, and feed another champ that you do want to get up to level 60. So that's what I mean by that. So moving on, let's go to another one in campaign. And let's see, we're looking for this one, Diabolist. Alright. Again, Diabolist, very, very good champ. You can't go wrong, in my opinion, on ranking her to 60. And even if you're not using her a lot, she is very good in Faction Wars. So let's go ahead and go over her kit. Her A1, again, not her money move. It's attacks one enemy, has a 10% chance of placing a sleep debuff for 1 turn. Okay. You can book it up and buff it up to 20. That's meh. But these next 2 abilities is what makes her good. Okay, her A2 is Electric Storm, attacks all enemies, places a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. And when booked up, it's on a 3-turn cooldown. That is very good. And then kicking into her A3 is Positive Charge. Again, you're going to want this ascended. And it fills the turn meter of all allies by 15% and decreases the turn meter of all enemies by 15%. And when booked up, that's on a 4-turn cooldown. So her kit is very, very good. And again, I don't think you can go wrong with leveling her up to level 60. And she is, again, very accessible and farmable in campaign. So that's pretty much it for the rares in the campaign. There's some that are like 50 champs, like Spirit Host. We can go over here. She's on stage 4. Again, you can see her right here. She's a good champ. Definitely worth taking up to 50. Can help you out a lot early game, and we can go over this real quick. Her A1's Reap, meh. It's attacks one enemy, heals by 50% of damage infected. Not really why you're using her. This one is one of the more reasons, and it's the A2, and it's as ascended, places a 50% increase attack buff on all allies for 2 turns, and booked up, it's on a 3-turn cooldown. And this is also a very good skill on her. Removes Dark Gift, removes all debuffs on allies, places a block debuff on all allies for 1 turn, booked up on a 5-turn cooldown. And her aura early game isn't bad. It increases ally speed in all battles by 10%. There is a lot better, but for early game, if you need that speed aura, it's not a bad option. Alright. That'll pretty much be it for the rares. There is one uncommon I actually want to talk about on here. And let's see. It's under level 10. And it's Saurus. Saurus is more of a specialist, but early to mid game, he is not bad. And I believe on uncommons, for me, I don't really feel comfortable taking any of them past 50, but they are again good up to 50 and early to mid game. So what he does, the uncommons are very simple. Is A1 attacks all enemies. Booked up does more damage. A2 attacks all enemies 2 times. Has a 10% chance of placing a 50% heal reduction debuff for 1 turn. And also places a 50% heal reduction debuff if the target's hit points is less than or equal to 40%. And booked up, it's on a 3-turn cooldown. So he is just wave clearing, nuker, and early game nuker, and he's not bad at that, and definitely very viable in spiders up to level 15. Okay, so don't want to get too much into the uncommons, so moving on from that, we'll take a look at a couple more uncommons that are kind of unique and worth working up. Go back out of here real quick and go into the index. Okay, one that I actually hear a lot about is Sniper, and she's under Dark Elves. And there she is right there. And again, I personally, when I first started this game, had Sniper, and I feel like I almost made a mistake because she was almost, when I didn't know what I was doing, my first champ that I took up to level 60 over Kayle and Belor, I do believe. Because I felt she was so strong. You feel like she's so strong in the early to mid game. But I'm so glad I didn't take her to level 60, because inevitably I took Kayle, then Belor, then I hit my first legendary, took that up there, and she kind of just sat there, and then I kind of quit using her, and then I tried to gear her up later for Faction Wars, and I realized her base is just too low for in-game, her base stats. And unless you gear her up extremely, extremely well, like, it's kind of hard to do to get her to put out the damage you need. So I would say, again, she's one that I'd rank up to 50 and definitely use early to mid game. And this is her kit. It's, again, pretty simple. Her A1 is double shot, attacks 1 enemy 2 times, has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, and fills this champion's turn meter by 15% on each critical hit. And her A2 is really why you're using her. It attacks all enemies 2 times, has a 25% chance booked up of placing a 15% decreased speed debuff for 1 turn. Okay, so now again, on something else, a little side note, if you're new to the game, if you are, because I used rare books on her at the beginning of the game, which isn't the end of the world, but it's not ideal. If you are going to book Sniper up, you want to book her up with duplicates of her character. Don't use books, because books are so valuable in game. It is absolutely a waste of books to book a green and uncommon. So what you want to do is book uncommons with their duplicate characters if you do this. And you definitely want to book them up with their duplicate characters. Okay, 2 more to look at in the uncommons that are worth mentioning, and they are under Sacred Order. Okay, and the first one is Outlaw Monk. Okay, Outlaw Monk, again, I'd take him up to 50. Very, very good at one thing and one thing only, and that is Clan Boss, up to kind of around maybe the Brutal level. And I have seen some people take him up to 60. In my opinion, by that time, there's better options. Okay, so again, you can use them for food later if you take them up to 50. And as you can see in the reviews, pretty much one thing. Alright, so his A1 is attacks 1 enemy, has a 25% chance of granting an extra turn booked up. And you'd be surprised, that does hit quite often, but that's not really why you're using them. You're using them for this ability right here, Foul Play. Places 2 strong versions of the poison debuff on the target for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. So that is not bad early game. You can pair him with your Kayle if you got Kayle, various other champs, and yeah, he's not bad option for Clan Boss. So we'll slide on over to the other one here, which I personally have not really messed with, and I kind of wish I did. I had tried Outlaw Monk and used him for quite some time, and Sniper and Saurus, but Armiger is actually really good, and I didn't realize it when I first started out, and I've actually seen videos of people using him at 60 on Spider, and he still does well. Okay, so his kit is pretty simple again, but it's pretty nice because these are things that you learn that are very valuable late game, and that's turn meter manipulation. Okay, so his A1 attacks one enemy, decreases the turn meter by 30% if this attack is critical. Damage inflicted is proportional to defense. Okay, so again, you probably want to get crit rate up to 100% and probably stack defense, but this is very good skill for an A1. And then his A2 is actually his money skill. That's attack one enemy. Damage inflicted is proportional to defense and increases accordingly to enemy max hit points. Enemies killed by this skill cannot be revived. So that also means early game Ice Golem, he can be effective. And what makes this so unique is it is off of enemy max hit points. And maybe I'll make a video later describing some of this, but it hits very hard on bosses, and that's why people use him on spiders and etc. And he is the only uncommon that has enemy max hit points, and there's only a select few rares like Heartseeker, and that might be it, that are rare, and they're kind of harder to get because I do believe it's only under Void. So Armiger is a very good character for being uncommon, and that would be the one, if I had to argue after watching videos and seeing stuff, that would actually be worth taking the 60. Okay, so that pretty much does it for the uncommons. Now, for this video, I'm trying to just keep it to accessible rares and easily acquired rares, and obviously the starting rares and accessible uncommons. With that being said, maybe I'll do another video on this too. There is a lot of viable rares out there, some that are even S tier, and just to name a couple right off the bat is Apothecary. You definitely want to take him to 60. Gnarlhorn can be a good one. Coldheart definitely a 60. So again, maybe I'll make a video later on that, but for now I just wanted to talk about the easy accessible ones and the ones that you could farm from campaign. And another note is I was thinking about on my next video, I was going to make it a describing how to use Raid's interface, and then I thought that might be kind of boring and a little stupid. But the one thing that I found funny, and I want to show everybody, you might know this, might not, about the interface, is if you go into the chat, you open it up, you can go up in this top right corner right here, and it'll say, with a little pencil, it'll say English 888 right now. Well, you can actually click on that, and then you can pick your language and select any channel from 1 to 999. Like 64, good channel for, I think there's a lot of young players in there. You can go to 641's a good, or 461's a good channel, 888, 666, etc. You can find your own channels this way and kind of scan through them. Ironically, I did not know this until I was almost 8 months into the game. So maybe if you're in this for, social aspects, I figure this is one thing on the interface I figured I'd show everybody on that. So that's that. Alright, well, that pretty much wraps up this video today. Again, if you have any ideas for any videos, I'm definitely, this is the start. I'm going to make a lot of helpful videos and try to get out a certain amount of those on interface and like using stuff. I don't know which videos on all that, but I eventually want to get into like the champ building videos, but I feel like I got to get a base of the basic videos first. So that will conclude today's video. Thank you for your support and your time, and if you like this content and video and you want to see more, please subscribe and comment below. Thank you.